Welcome to our podcast, Revenue Checkpoint, where we discuss how to rescue revenue. Today, we have our guest, Prasanna Deshmukh, who has led several transformations and big ones, taking companies and their products from various stages of subscription monetization journey. Welcome, Prasanna. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi. Thank you, Raveen, for inviting me to Revenue Checkpoint podcast. My name is Prasanna Deshmukh. My work has involved delivering subscription monetization and digital transformation across different industries. I have done SaaS and subscription monetization enablement for WebEx business from a high growth to a large scale as part of Cisco organization. I've done digital transformation enablement for TE Connectivity, a high-tech manufacturing company. And I have worked at VMware delivering perpetual license model transformation to a subscription model.
Would you like to share the issues that you faced during the transformation journey from subscription monetization for these billion-dollar companies that you were working for?
So thanks for that question. The monetization journey, or the subscription monetization journey to be specific, was really driven more with the business and the changes that happened over course of time with the business and the strategy changes that occurred. So when we started at WebEx, it was a usage-based model. It was billing per minute model. We moved from a billing per minute model to a seat license-based model. Then we moved from a license-based model to an online digital selling model where it was a freemium version as a leave behind. Then when we were acquired by Cisco, it was a scaling model and partner selling model that we had to enable. So across each of those stages of our company, there were numerous changes that were occurring beyond just a go-to-market strategy changing. The product had to also evolve along the way. And as product was evolving, our IT capabilities to enable business needed to be evolved as well. We had to make decisions in order to continue to deliver and not be an impedance to business to go to market. We had to take some shortcuts. Sometimes it was shortcuts where process shortcuts where manual steps were introduced. Sometimes those manual steps were trained and delivered by our offshore team. We called it our offshore team automation. We had ability to essentially make sure we were scaling. And then with Cisco, we had to make sure we were integrating into Cisco's go-to-market tools and selling tools in order to enable our business to scale with Cisco's selling model. At VMware, on the other hand, there were different challenges because there was an existing business. And what we're really looking to transform was to move from a perpetual and term-based licenses to subscription-based model, which really means taking entitlement-based licenses and moving them in transition to a subscription-based model, including partner selling that we were doing as well, really, right? So it was a combination of different business transformation, but what was consistent was we had to do whatever it took for us to enable that, and that meant accepting always not having an automation in place at the time we wanted, so accepting manual processes or process workarounds in order to enable the business to do what it needed to do to be successful.
I can only imagine the tight deadlines to enable the business, how that created shortcuts and a lack of automation and manual steps that you had to do. I'm sure this led you to accumulate some residual challenges in automating the business. Can you mention a little bit more about that?
Yes, Raveen, I think when you look at things that I spoke about, each stage of WebEx growth, for example, came with its own set of compromises that we implemented. And each compromise really is the residual challenge in a way, really, right? So the fact that we made these compromises to deliver business priority in the timeline that business needed meant that we were left behind with a lot of debts, really, right? Whether they are process debt, where we had manual processes set behind, whether they were technology debt because we just leverage what was available rather than leveraging the right tool, whether the technology debt was a result of some of the new innovations that came into market and we need to leverage those to solve the problem. And then, of course, next stage comes in and that becomes a priority. So you're always looking at, from an IT perspective, how do you help grow the business? How do you help change the business? And you're prioritizing those on your budget. So you don't really have in your scope to be able to go back and fix those issues or get them to the end state that you envision when you set out the architectural blueprint for that capability. So yeah, there are always residual challenges, and that that to-do list, if you will, of those residual challenges kept growing really, right? So as an IT organization, you always feel that burden of how do I go back and fix things. Meanwhile, I have to deliver the new capabilities on top of it. So yes, definitely a lot of residual challenges.
Prasanna, thanks for sharing the examples. Would you take it a step ahead, and is it possible to quantify the size of revenue leakages that you faced?
Yeah, there are many leakages, as we talked about, from residual challenges, which lend itself to some of the incomplete work or non-automated work. Not only that, fundamentally, there are things as you grow in your growth stage, you allow certain things to happen and you start to realize that some of the manual processes that you have, for example, adjustments or credits you're giving to your customers. We had either collection teams doing that as they're collecting some of the revenues, or we had our CSMs doing that in order to manage customer churn. Whether it's a service quality issue, whether it's a billing issue, whether it's a usage not being charged correctly, any of those lend themselves to our customer success team or our collection teams providing, if you would, adjustments to the invoice that was generated. In the beginning, we didn't have any governance process around it. So from a system perspective, there was nothing controlling and managing how much credits they would be giving. So we had to recognize that and we had to put that in place. But that was purely a kind of a band-aid, really, right? The main issue really was the customer churn, the incorrect billing, really, right? So you needed to fix those issues and make sure those were taken care of. Similarly, on renewal process, for example, it's often that the renewal may end up going further than the actual contract end date, especially for large enterprise contracts. When that would happen, in order to not to disrupt their usage of our service, we would keep the service going beyond the contract end date as the customer was in the renewal process, what we call a jeopardy process at that point in time. And during that time, you would have essentially disconnect between a billing system, which may think the contract has ended, and the service itself, which is still running and operating. So you would have to essentially reconcile this notion, make sure all of those systems are in sync. And if you didn't do that, then you would have kind of a mismatch across all of these systems. Obviously, at the end of the renewal process, the customer renews and we can sync all this up. But what if the customer churn and all these things are not left behind, really, right? Then when I look at VMware, some of the things really related there were the complexity of number of different licenses and entitlements that were sitting in perpetual or term licenses. At renewal time, you're trying to convert them over to the subscription. While the customer may choose to move certain licenses to subscription, they may choose to terminate certain licenses, or they may choose to keep certain licenses in the current license model. So then the complexity of what is happening when and which ones are converted, which ones are not converted, tracking all of that entitlement was really creating a lot of complexity and definitely was impacting revenue leakage. So either because of manual processes with no governance, or because the complexity of the business in terms of being able to track these things, or disconnected data, if you would, across the system. So either of those situations, at best case, they are data quality issues. At worst case, they're causing revenue leakages, or in addition to revenue leakages, customer churn also really is on top of that. So definitely a lot of these examples of these kinds of things that exist in any IT systems were there for us as well.
Would you take it a step ahead, and is it possible to quantify the size of revenue leakages that you faced?
Quantifying is always difficult. I remember when we were at WebEx, we used to talk about customer churn issue in early days, and it was a close to 3% monthly churn, which was about on a yearly basis, about 36%. And RC used to speak about, tub analogy there, right? You're filling the tub, but there's a leakage underneath in the tub. And so you have to do more work to fill the tub, really, right? And we focused on figuring out a way to reduce overall the customer churn, really, right? Then at VMware, there was an issue at one point in time. I remember one specific case, we had a code problem that came up at the end of the quarter. And it turned out to be, we had created a backdoor in our CPQ tool that enabled a sales team to upload a code directly in order to expedite the code to order process. And they leveraged that because it was end of the quarter. We wanted to close the business and all the necessary conditions, if you would. And they leveraged the capability that we had built specifically for this scenario. It turned out that when we did that, or when they uploaded the code directly, it bypassed a lot of the pricing discount logic that were built into the CPQ portion. So it was kind of a direct pass through from a code to order perspective. And then it ended up giving them discount that they were not eligible for. And we discovered this issue late. It was, quarter had already closed. The code had already gone out to the customer. The order had already been placed. So it was one of those situations where, we found it too late, really, right? So, but these are some of the kind of very good examples of, I would say, situations that occur, really, right? And the size of this code, a particular code was, close to $500K, $500,000, really, right? So you're talking multiple codes like that went through. So pretty significant problem, right? So.
Wow, this is critical example. If you would have identified this early enough, you could have saved this revenue loss.
Yes. Obviously, if you were able to apply some sort of a revenue assurance model to this, or make sure that on a real-time basis, essentially validating that the code that's being generated has met all the criteria, then from a real-time perspective, we could have put a hold on that code, really, right? Now, so I think that's another reason why we need to be very careful about, sometimes the manual processes are meant to expedite the business and deliver. But if not taught through properly, then it could lead to a lot of these scenarios where it causes revenue leakage for you, really, right? So having a real-time solution that validates this to ensure your revenue lifecycle essentially is correct and all the business logic and rules that you have in place are indeed firing on all cylinders, really. So.
This is so real and painful. Prasanna, who should own revenue leakage in the organization?
Well, that's a very difficult question, Naveen. I think if you think about revenue leakage, and it really stems from your quote to cash processes, which is, you could also go all the way from lead to cash processes, really, right? So you're thinking about marketing function, sales function, your order desk, your billing operations, your service, which is really your product and engineering organization, and then all the way down to your finance organization. But ultimately, the brunt of this really comes back down to a finance organization for any type of a customer issue resolution, whether it's providing adjustment, whether it's providing credits, whether it's enabling certain capabilities or feature. All of those decisions ultimately kind of comes back down to the finance organization. So at a point, they may also, in a way, your SOX controls may also come into play here, really, right? So even though it's not specifically from a SOX control perspective, if you don't have proper controls in place, you need to find out issues that exist in your revenue lifecycle where you may need to have these controls identified and put in place. So I fundamentally believe it'll be somewhere in the CFO organization. But I think there's an overall partnership. I think somebody needs to own it. Somebody needs to be the business sponsor. But ultimately, it's really coming together under that umbrella across the organization, really across that enterprise, with the CIO kind of having a seat at the table, and then sales and sales, marketing, and other functions also joining in to look at this and see what they could do to overall, from a global optimization from lead to cash. It's not just a siloed optimization or siloed addressing of the issue, But I think it's at the sponsorship level, or it has to be at a CFO level, really, right? From a finance perspective, that's what I believe. So,
Any closing thoughts for our audience?
yes, I think as we've talked about this during this podcast, it's really about the residual challenges, really, right? The decisions you make. We all have innate sense of the work that we didn't quite get to across all functions, right? It's not just about a quote to cash process or lead to cash in each of the functions, really, right? When you look at those, we know there's a list of things that we need to go back and fix, the quote unquote residual challenges, but we don't really have a quantification of what are the impacts of those challenges. We kind of have a sense of it, a gut feel for it. Having so first statement really is recognize we have problems. And the second part of that really is to say, how do I get a view of it in totality so I can make the right decisions and be proactive in fixing those issues? And then thirdly, really, right, continue to monitor the issues that are fixed and so that they don't crop back up again. So I would say just get a sense of that, get a sense of the tool, have a tool in place that assures from a revenue assurance perspective that your revenue lifecycle is working as you expected. Or if there are any faults in there, you have a point of view on quantifying so you can prioritize them, and then you can put them on your pipeline of a backlog of things to fix. So I would say just accept that you have a problem and then do something about it, really, right? So as they always say, first step to fixing a problem is recognizing you have a problem.
Prasanna, thank you for joining us. I'm sure our audience is going to find this very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Raveen, for having me on your Raveen Checker Point. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the issues and the challenges we faced across monetizing subscription-based economy. It was a great pleasure for me to relive some of the challenges we faced and how we overcome them. Thank you.